The NBA in the 2000s might have been the most dysfunctional era in league history. There were fights in the crowd, refs getting caught gambling on games, and entire teams falling apart behind the scenes. And somehow, the league didn't just survive, it thrived. This was a time where basketball was at its ugliest. Slower, more physical, just messy, stuck between the flash of the 90s and whatever the hell the league was becoming. But out of all that chaos came some of the biggest names we've ever seen. The rise of the most hyped prospect in sports history. The guy who made you want to get your ass back in the gym at 2 in the morning, and the player who changed the culture of basketball forever. This is what the NBA was really like in the 2000s. It all really started at the worst time possible, right when Michael Jordan walked away from the game. Because the 90s weren't just good for basketball, they were perfect. The entire league revolved around Jordan. So when he retired, after that second three-peat, the NBA didn't just lose its biggest star, it lost the one thing holding everything else together. And almost immediately, things started getting weird. The Bulls got blown up from the inside. Tensions between players and owners were already building. And just 2 weeks after the most watched finals game in history, the league shut down. It was a complete disaster. Chaos everywhere. Owners and players were at each other's throats, and nobody even knew if there'd be a season at all. Training camps got canceled, exhibition games disappeared, and the regular season, it was already falling apart. By the time the lockout ended, 204 days later, players had lost $500 million, and fans weren't exactly thrilled. Nearly a third of them thought the game had gotten worse. The season was cut down to just 50 games, and it showed. Empty seats, falling ratings. For the first time in years, the NBA actually felt like it was losing people. When the players finally came back, it wasn't pretty. Guys were heaving by the second quarter like the season had already worn them out. Karl Malone put up 24-9 and somehow won MVP in his late 30s. The Knicks limped out to the finals only to get destroyed, and the Spurs quietly snagged their first ring, mostly unnoticed outside of southern Texas. Meanwhile, the world had just watched the greatest player of all time chase the three-peat, and now the game on the court felt like a shadow of that magic. 1 year changed, and the NBA felt slower, weaker, less exciting. From the high-flying theatrics of Jordan to the lumbering double-big lineups in San Antonio, flipping on a game no longer felt like watching history. The league had lost its rhythm, and for a while, it didn't even know what it was anymore. There was some hope though. Although it hadn't worked yet, there were some rumblings from LA with the duo of Shaq and Kobe running the show. And once the league was able to get back to a full season, they took over. In the 2000 season, Shaq ran away with the MVP, Kobe found himself on the all-defensive team and all-NBA second team, with some help from Shaq's 31-15. They blew through the playoffs to win their first title together. It was a hostile takeover.
Portland has 3 timeouts left. The Lakers have 2. Bryant to Shaq.
Shaq was the most dominant physical force in NBA history, combining a 7'1", 350-pound frame with athleticism, strength, and skill unlike anyone we'd ever seen. GMs across the league scrambled, desperate to sign a big-body center who could even dream of competing with him. By the late 1990s, Shaquille O'Neal was no longer the young, fun kid who had just been thrilled to reach the 1995 finals, where Hakeem Olajuwon utterly pummeled him. Now, Shaq was surging towards one of the highest peaks the game had ever seen, and right beside him, a young Kobe Bryant was starting to turn heads. The version that won the 2000 championship, a little rough around the edges. Sure, but with the flash, finesse, and mean-mugging stare that looked like he wanted to chew your face off, this guy was never just Shaq's sidekick. But neither of the two would win the MVP the next season, because in Philly, a cultural sensation was taking over. The NBA was a white-collar job off the floor built to sell you sneakers, and sell you on the next playoff series. With coaches in suits and players that shut the fuck up, there was a corporate line that very few dared to cross. And then in 1996 comes Allen Iverson. In what was the craziest rise in NBA history, Allen Iverson went from going to prison in high school to being pardoned out of his sentence due to a 60-minute segment, to best player in college basketball, to NBA nightmare. AI did the opposite of the norms. Compared to Michael Jordan, who was not only the greatest to ever play, but the greatest marketing magnet in sports history, Allen Iverson was a guy who would show up late to commercial shoots, skip practice, and wipe his ass with the NBA's dress code. He didn't leave his attitude or his style in the door, he owned it for everyone to see. No one but AI was walking in with do-rags and pimped out chains. MJ came in right after playing 18 holes in a suit and tie. Tim Duncan was reserved. Kobe wasn't worried about anything but mentally torturing you. Iverson was just different. He was 6'0" but thought he was Vince Carter, and in 2001, the league was his. On a team that had no business being there, he carried the 76ers to the promised land, leading the league in scoring, leading the league in steals, and leading the league in swagger while he was doing it. In a league dominated by giants, Allen Iverson hoisted one of the most deserved MVPs of all time, leading the Sixers team starring Dikembe Mutombo and Aaron McKie to the NBA Finals, all while the NBA was breathing down his neck. His presence was a culture shock to a league that had become obsessed with professionalism in the Stern era. But today, you see his impact in every corner of the game. The tats, the expression, the social media presence, a lot of that has to do with what AI did for the game. While the Lakers were bringing their dominance and AI his culture, the Pacific Northwest was breeding one of the more terrifying, talented, and legally embattled teams this century. To the average eye, they were a deep, physical, and exciting team that was ready to compete with the top teams in the West. But so much more than that, they were the poster boys of one of the most scandalous eras in basketball. They were led by vet Scottie Pippen, the explosive Rasheed Wallace, Damon Stoudemire, and later a young Zach Randolph. In 2000, they came within one quarter of toppling the Lakers dynasty in one of the more controversial Laker games of that decade. But even more controversial than their performance was their team construction. In the NBA, talent rules all. If you can play, you're probably gonna play. But the Portland Jailblazers took this to a whole new level, signing some of the most dysfunctional, toxic, and messy characters to ever play the game of basketball. You had Ruben Patterson, who later got charged with the attempted rape of his child's nanny before assaulting his wife just a year later and now owing 6 figures in child support. Quintel Woods was holding dogfights in his own home. Stoudemire tried passing through airport security with weed wrapped in aluminum foil, and got arrested and fined $250,000 after getting arrested for a third time after getting caught smoking with Rasheed Wallace.
You're under arrest.
Rasheed Wallace.
David Stoudemire.
Rasheed Wallace picked up 41 techs in the 2001 season, a feat that probably would be impossible nowadays with how many games he would have to miss. A 19-year-old Zebo fucked around and found out with Ruben Patterson after a physical altercation led to him having to hide away in fears of him being killed. They were even able to get rid of Sebastian Telfair before he got slammed with weapons and marijuana charges out the ass. So much shit went on in that locker room that simply wouldn't fly today. They weren't quite as harsh as the 1990s Pistons on the court, but that was mostly because they blew off enough steam off of the court. The Spurs had a ring in '99, but for the next few years, LA ran the West like a freight train. Shaq was unstoppable, Kobe was on the rise, the Spurs weren't quite ready. Hell, for a while it wasn't even a rivalry, it was a massacre. 3 straight finals, 3 straight MVPs for Shaq, only 3 losses across all those games. LA bulldozed every challenger, nobody could touch them. Then came 2003. Tim Duncan, quiet, deadly, and unstoppable. The Spurs shot 47% from 3 that series. Kobe went nuclear with 32 points a night. Shaq tried to hold down the fort with 25 and 14, but it wasn't enough. And that's when the cracks started to show. Shaq coasted, Kobe raged, both tried to hold each other accountable, but neither looked in the mirror. The unstoppable Lakers, suddenly human. The dynasty still stood, but the foundation was shaking. The 2000 offseason didn't do any good either. Shaq was calling for an expensive extension, Kobe wasn't exactly being transparent with his wishes as free agency was just a year away, and looming above it all was the Kobe grape case that had him absent for the start of training camp. But despite all that drama, the Lakers had some success. They added Gary Payton and Karl Malone, put the Spurs away in 6 in just the second round, and they were looking at the Pistons in the finals at -700 favorites. But while the Lakers were a house divided, the Pistons were a well-oiled 5-man machine. From the start of Game 1, it was clear that it wasn't going to be a 4 or 5 game series in favor of the Lakers like everyone thought. Ben Wallace was making life difficult for Shaq, holding to inefficient hook shots while keeping him away from the basket. He also didn't seem to be putting in as much effort as in past years. He looked lethargic on the boards and on defense, and Wallace absolutely ate him alive. The Pistons were playing Kobe just as well. They constantly sent doubles and traps to make him uncomfortable, and game after game, he just didn't look like himself. After cruising to a Game 1 win, the Pistons were just 4 seconds away from going up 2-0 before Kobe threw up a prayer and sent the game into OT. Malone was injured and was rendered kinda useless. Payton was arguably the worst because he was doing straight cardio out there, getting cooked on defense and providing no offensive help. and the Pistons were rolling. Tayshaun Prince had Kobe in hell. Rip Hamilton and Chauncey Billups were putting up incredibly efficient numbers, and Ben Wallace was doing Ben Wallace things. After putting up only 68 points in Game 3, the Lakers just looked defeated. And the Pistons took 4-5 to beat the Lakers in embarrassing but impressive fashion. Detroit was a tougher, more cohesive team, and was everything that team basketball was supposed to be. But that series may have been the most important for the Lakers, because it took a situation from bad to worse. Shaq and Kobe were already butting heads as 1A and 1B, but the second the final horn blew, there was uncertainty all around. When Kobe was dealing with his legal woes, it became insufferable for Phil Jackson to deal with.
And Kobe had a real hard time that year and was disrespectful, and so I went in and told the leadership that even though we were negotiating a contract, that I think that Kobe was uncoachable and he was difficult to handle at this time. Probably wasn't the best coach. I wasn't the best coach for him.
And this is Phil Jackson we're talking about. At the time, the 9-time champion just as a coach, and Kobe was too much for him. Whether he got fired or resigned, he was out just 3 days after losing to the Pistons. Shaq liked Jackson, and when you add the fact that the Lakers weren't crumbling to his extension demands, he was out of the door and on to the next thing. Shaq went to the Heat to prove to Kobe that he could win a ring without him, and Kobe was clearly favored by the Lakers and wanted to prove they could win a ring without Shaq. But in that same offseason, the Olympics were taking place, and the US fielded a team without both Shaq and Kobe. The team was still elite on paper, starring Tim Duncan, Allen Iverson, and newly arrived rookie LeBron James. And everyone believed that achieving the gold would be just as simple as every other Olympics that pros were allowed to play. But it wasn't. First off, the roster was a bit bizarre. It was an interesting mix of vets and young guys, and in addition to the two Laker friends, KG, T-Mac, Ben Wallace, and many others were nowhere to be seen. You see, these other teams practiced together around the clock, built chemistry, and held the same tight teams together through the years. The US just rolled out their JV team with a couple of big names, and had the preconception that they were going to win just like any other year. The team lacked real shooting, lacked real chemistry, but there was also a lack of how important these international games were to other teams. And in Game 1 of the 2004 Olympics, Carlos Arroyo and sharpshooter Eddie Casiano, who never even sniffed an NBA court, toppled the US by 20. The US would limp through the group stage, losing to Lithuania as well before clinching a quarterfinals berth miraculously. Larry Brown was hesitant to play any of the younger guys, and the players that did play played ISO-heavy ego ball while the other teams were picking them apart with their pinpoint passing and cohesiveness. And despite making it to the semis, it was only a matter of time before the States lost again. And this time it was to an Argentinian team led by Luis Scola and maestro Manu Ginobili, who beat the US based off of passion, chemistry, and a well-beat team before going on to win the gold. It was uplifting for Argentina, but a gut punch for the US. It showed how broken things had become. An embarrassment like that didn't just hurt the country, it hurt the league. What does it say when more than half your stars skip the biggest international stage in the world? Either because they didn't want to be there, or because their lives were already in chaos. Teams were falling apart. Stars like Kobe were spending entire off-seasons dealing with legal battles. Shaq was acting like a baby. Allen Iverson had his DUI, and feuds and scandals were looking in every corner of the league. And this was before social media, before every mistake went viral. There was a level of unhinged behavior that almost feels impossible today. This was an era where even the most bizarre stories felt like just another Tuesday. It starts with the surreal tragedy of Eddie Griffin. Griffin crashed his SUV into a parked car while allegedly drunk. What made it unforgettable was the police report. He was watching a porno on a screen installed in his dashboard at the moment of impact. After the crash, he walked into a liquor store. And years later, he would tragically lose his life in another drunk driving accident. And yet, for every heavy moment, there was something completely absurd, usually courtesy of Ron Artest. Long before he became Metta World Peace, Artest was the league's ultimate agent of chaos. In 2002, he randomly pulled Paul Pierce's shorts down in the middle of a possession. No strategy, no logic, just chaos. Pierce calmly pulled them back up, kept his dribble, and drilled the jumper right in his face, perfectly capturing an era where the basketball was elite, even when everything else made absolutely no sense. But Artest wasn't the only lunatic in the league. Stephon Marbury was live-streaming himself at 2 a.m. eating Vaseline, while ranting to fans like everything was completely normal. and somehow, that barely even cracked the top of the strangest stories of the era. While it seemed like teams were imploding left and right, in the midst of the chaos of the era, the arrival of the Chosen One had the league feeling hopeful. LeBron wasn't just hyped. He was the most anticipated prospect the sport has ever seen. He was on ESPN for almost his entire high school career. Even though the expectations were higher than anything anyone had seen, he immediately lived up to them. In his debut, he put up 25, 9, and 6. Most rookies take a bit to get up to speed in the league, even if it's just a few games, but LeBron was a star from the jump. In a season defined by controversy and friction, LeBron was a clean, exciting, and superhuman figure that the NBA could lean on. But he wasn't alone. Despite Darko being an absolute dud, the 2003 draft also held the arrival of Dwayne Wade, Chris Bosh, and Carmelo Anthony, and a wave of players who could instantly flip franchises around. By the end of the season, the landscape was shifting. A new era of players was coming in. But just as the league was getting hopeful that a clean shift was coming, the Indiana Pacers had to shut everything down. As Reggie Miller's career came to a close, the Pacers started to add on some new pieces to try to piggyback off of his success. They added Jermaine O'Neal, an elite post player and shot blocker, defensive menace Ron Artest, and added Steven Jackson on for the 2005 season after a 61 campaign the year before. Rick Carlisle was proving himself. Reggie Miller had one more season in him, and things were looking up. And the year before, in the most grinded out series in NBA history, they fell to Detroit in 6. The average score was 75-73. Neither team ever sniffed 40% from the field. It was a hard-nosed, all-out defensive matchup, but the Pacers had hopes that they'd get them back in the following season. But in Game 9 of that 2004-2005 season, the NBA was flipped on its head. When the two teams met for the first time that regular season, the Pacers manhandled Detroit, taking command in the first half and never giving up. With the game just seconds away from finishing, an unnecessary foul by Artest followed by an unnecessary reaction from Ben Wallace had the two teams brawling.
Ben Wallace again. There goes Artest up into the crowd. He's absolutely out of his mind. And Steven Jackson slugging people in the crowd here. The whole Indiana team is in the crowd. And now the Pistons are coming over.
Ron Artest looked like a 6'8", roided out WWE wrestler who was knocking out dudes who work on power lines. By the time anyone even realized what was going on, the entire Pacers roster was beating the shit out of fans. This was too crazy to even script. The game switched from what looked like one of the most heated rivalries in the NBA to immediately one of the most embarrassing moments in sports history. The Pacers finally left while getting pelted with beer and hot dogs, but what everyone was really waiting for was to see what the fallout from the incident would be, and it was unbelievable. David Stern's reaction was simple. Holy shit. Jermaine O'Neal called it 20 times worse in person than on TV. A Pacers assistant coach compared it to gladiator-type scenes. 2 spectators were hospitalized, the Pacers left in a police escort, and the NBA hit him hard.
Leans back and look at Jamal Chase and asks him, do you think we're going to get in trouble? I say, Ron, trouble? You lucky we still have a job.
Artest, gone for the season. Steven Jackson, 30 games. O'Neal, 15 games. 6 more players were suspended. A championship contender wiped out overnight. But what took as big of a hit was the league's reputation. This was coming on the heels of the Jailblazers era. The team full of criminals had dissolved, and then one of the best teams in the league beat the shit out of fans. This was 10 times worse. Jackson and Artest were lucky that Stern didn't expel them from the league entirely. Frankly, they were lucky they didn't go to prison. Their own fans started referring to the team as the Thugs. The next time the two teams played, bomb threats were called in. The NBA had to completely revamp their security and alcohol measures in order to stay alive. A lot of players and fans hate on David Stern for how harsh he was. But if you know anything about league history, he was a product of his own environment. David Stern came into the NBA at a time of turmoil. The 1970s were a time that the NBA was full of cokeheads. Violence was out of control, and the NBA was turning out its worst product yet. Fast forward a few years, and through tightening up the rules to a death grip, Stern cleaned up the reputation, propped up the stars that carried the 80s to a whole new stratosphere of popularity, and kickstarted what would become the greatest decade in basketball history in the 1990s. But come the early 2000s, many of the same problems were recurring. NBA players weren't creating history on the court unless it came in unlikely acts of violence. Players weren't getting caught with blow left and right. But when it came to DUIs, domestic violence, and any other charges under the sun, TMZ certainly wasn't short on storylines. The NBA's image was slipping, and just like last time, he was ready to take control. And where it all started was the mandatory dress code. It sparked immediate backlash, largely because of the cultural shift brought in by Allen Iverson, whose style had become synonymous with the league's new identity. But coming off the heels of the Malice at the Palace and everything that came with it, it was pretty clear what Stern was trying to do. He wasn't just changing how players dressed, he was trying to change how the league was perceived. The reaction from players was immediate. Many believed there were racial undertones to the policy, but at the same time, they understood why it was happening. Because whether the league wanted to admit it or not, the optics were bad. And having an older white commissioner telling a predominantly black league how to dress, that was always going to create tension. But over time, something interesting happened. It worked. Players didn't lose their individuality. They adapted it. Instead of oversized jerseys and sagging shorts, guys started showing up in tailored fits, designer suits, and high-end fashion. What could have been restrictive turned into expression. Suddenly, walking into the arena became its own runway. You had players like Dwayne Wade and LeBron James turning pregame arrivals into spectacles, blending hip-hop culture with professionalism in a way that never really had before. The new CBA also banned high schoolers from going straight to the league before either going international or to college, due to a lack of maturity found in lots of these kids. But just as one scandal got cleaned up, another one appeared. And this one had the potential to do a lot more damage than just a couple punches. If fans ever start believing the games themselves are rigged, then the league as we know it is over. Because once people stop trusting the competition, the stadium's empty and the product loses its soul. If there was one person who did more damage to the league's reputation than almost anyone else, it wasn't a player or a coach, or even a team full of wild personalities. It was referee Tim Donaghy. From roughly 2003 to 2007, Donaghy wasn't just a ref. He was blatantly betting on NBA games he was officiating. And that was just the tip of the iceberg. He was already a notorious hothead before the scandal began. He thumbed his way into the job, and had someone else take the SAT form to get into Villanova, and had a record for off-the-court chaos that would make most people back away slowly. He got suspended from his country club for chasing people down, driving golf carts into ravines, lighting tractors, and nearly burning houses. Cheated on his wife with hookers, beat the shit out of a mailman, and even called the cops on a 5-year-old for throwing mud in his yard. Tim Donaghy fucking sucked. Even his fellow referees avoided him, and yet somehow this guy was trusted to run some of the most important games in professional basketball.
Because of a situation in the preseason referee meetings where Joe Crawford and I got into a fist fight, and he smacked me and I knocked him out, and I was taken out of the second round of the playoffs because of that.
Donaghy was betting with an old friend, so when he openly referred to as a moron, but rather than outright rigging games with bad calls, Donaghy took a different approach. He would pass along insider information, details about player-referee relationships or instructions from the league to refs about how to officiate certain teams. Essentially, he wasn't changing outcomes himself, he was predicting them. With this intel, his friend could place bets with astonishing accuracy, reportedly winning over 90% of the time. Then again, Donaghy's a total liar, so maybe he just called dumb fouls, we'll never really know. Eventually, the bookies caught on. A bookie for the Animals noticed that his friend Concannon was betting unusually large amounts on games, and he wanted in. Before long, they were trailing 6-figure bets and making a killing. Donaghy kept going, supplementing his $260,000 salary by betting on the very games he was officiating. At first it wasn't much, just a few $1,000s here and there, but by 2004 the volume had exploded. Donaghy would find huge wads of $100 bills stuffed in his jackets, each pile a reminder of how far he'd crossed the line. But then, in 2006, a high school acquaintance, James Batista, approached Donaghy with a proposition. $2,000 per game if his pick won. Donaghy already had a system in place, and the kicker, he wouldn't lose a dime if the pick failed. Everyone involved was nervous, but the potential payday was too big to pass up. The process was simple, almost absurd. A Donaghy would make his pick, relay it to Batista, and after a bit of betting to throw off the market, Batista would bet the house on Donaghy's selection. According to Batista, he couldn't even watch the games because if he knew what to look for, the results were shockingly obvious. But what comes up must come down, and eventually, the FBI caught on. Agent Phil Scala had gotten a tip in October of 2006 that there was some referee gambling activity in New York, and eventually, he narrowed it down to Donaghy. Most people didn't buy it. It was surreal, which made it harder for them to bring the hammer down on Donaghy and the crew. In an ESPN study, Donaghy's picks for Batista went 23, 3, and 4, and the odds of that happening was 1 in 6,155. Another test said that there was a 4% chance that Donaghy wasn't at fault, although later admitted. When the plot finally unraveled, David Stern called Tim Donaghy a rogue, isolated criminal. Stern was mainly upset that the league wasn't able to catch it first. I mean, something like this had the opportunity to shut down an entire sport's reputation. So what did the league do? They told the media that it was impossible to rig an NBA game. They closed ranks, obviously Donaghy, Batista, and everyone else that was betting on games, but the league needed to save face, so they did their best to divert the attention. But in reality, it was just another dark spot that the NBA needed to cover up to stay respected.
I've said it is rigged forever, and when a mobbed up ref came out, people still, it's just one guy.
I think that Stern was glad that the team running the league was a respected, fundamental driven team in the San Antonio Spurs, but they were really able to lean on the rise of LeBron through the years. The Spurs, who in a league full of ego-driven culture, were tearing through teams as the disciplined, mature, and put-together franchise. Led by Coach Pop, the Spurs drafted well. They won in '99 thanks to the Twin Towers and Duncan and Robinson, but sniping both Parker and Ginobili in the draft made the Big Three possible. In a league tarnished by the malice at the Palace, the Spurs showed that the controlled team focused on basketball was still just as effective. In '05, they rolled through the West to face the defending champs in one of the more interesting but forgotten finals of the decade. The teams traded blowouts for the first 4 games of the series. But Game 5 was absolute cinema. After neither team capitalized on their last possession in regulation, the game went into overtime, where bench star Robert Horry caught fire for the Spurs, nailing 3 after 3 before hitting a game winner with seconds left.
Now they have Prince on Ginobili, under on Parker. Here's Ginobili. Oh, there's a Horry for 3. Oh, unbelievable. This guy is off the charts. One shot after one shot. The old story, the most dangerous guy is the guy out of bounds.
But after pushing the series to 7, the Pistons couldn't win the series, and the Spurs had won their 3rd title. The series was full of lopsided games, missed shots, and slow basketball that mostly basketball nerds loved, but it was a stabilizer. In the next season, it was Miami's time to shine. Shaq would get his Kobe-less ring with the Heat proving that he could win without him, even if Dwayne Wade was the one with the Superman cape. These championship runs were seasons to remember. Watching the Spurs put together what would become the closest thing to basketball perfection felt like a blessing to the sport. And watching the Flash come into his own brought enough excitement to bring in a lot of new fans to 2000s basketball. Slowly, the league started pulling fans back in. Those who had checked out after the Lakers' early dominance, or even after the Bulls' dynasty crumbled, found themselves hooked again, and a whole new generation of fans discovered the NBA for the first time. The 2000s weren't just about chaos and controversy anymore. They were about rising stars, incredible performances, and a game that felt alive once again. But if we want to be honest with ourselves, what got fans in the door was the emergence of the guy who dominated the century like no one else. In 2006, he had another I'm here moment, when he went and dropped a triple-double in his first career playoff game, after coming second in MVP voting to the 2-timer Steve Nash. In the next season, he took his team to the finals. Despite getting swept by the Spurs, the fact of the matter was that he wasn't just a kid anymore. He was up there with the best in the world. In the next season, he had totally refined his scoring, led the league, and even though he got bounced in the second round, a new story came to light in the form of a rekindled rivalry. But during this time, let's not forget who the best player in the world was. Kobe Bryant may have had a quiet run in terms of team success throughout the mid-2000s, but his individual dominance was louder than ever. Consistent 30-point seasons, carrying offenses on his back, a fucking 81-point game. This guy at his peak was possibly the most skilled player to ever play the game, and that wasn't even his greatest strength. Kobe could make grown men shit their pants if you locked eyes with him long enough. No shot was too big. Honestly, it felt like no shot was big enough. He was the most feared scorer of the decade, and outside of Michael Jordan, probably the most feared of all time. And to be throwing out lineups with guys like Bill Walton, Kwame Brown, and Smush Parker next to him, that was one of the biggest crimes the Lakers ever committed, though it did result in some of the most insane individual performances in basketball history. By 2008, after landing Pau Gasol in a mid-season blockbuster trade, Kobe finally had a number 2. He had come off of 2 scoring titles to then win his only MVP in his career. Shocking, I know. And when they ran into the Spurs in the playoffs, they were ready. Kobe dropped 30 a game on 53% shooting to put these guys to bed in 5. The Lakers roster may not have had the depth to match up with the Spurs on paper, but catch Kobe Bryant with a full head of steam and it's not going to be a good night. The Lakers truly looked unbeatable storming into the NBA Finals. Only problem was, so did the Boston Celtics. That offseason before, Boston put together one of the most infamous big threes of all time. Kevin Garnett was freed from the trenches, known as the 2000s Timberwolves. This was debatably the most talented power forward to ever play the game, still in his prime. Mix this with the talents of Ray Allen, who you may know as the best shooter in history at the time, but in 2007 he was so good at everything else that we didn't even know that yet. This was all of course around Captain Paul Pierce, and there was no better way to revive the greatest rivalry in the history of the sport. Kobe was still looking for that first title without Shaq. The Big Three were looking for their first title period, and the first Boston ring since Larry Legend left town. There was a lot on the line. Game 1 became instant lore, not really because of what happened on the court, but because Paul Pierce had to get wheeled off because he didn't want to admit that he had to take a shit. Anyways, the Celtics took that game after a poor Kobe outing, and Paul Pierce putting the city on his back after he took his dump. Another problem was that the Lakers team was pretty rough once he got past their starting squad. It was rough, I mean very rough. Luke Walton shouldn't have even been in the league, let alone getting double-digit minutes in a finals game. And that was the story of the series. When Kobe was on, the Lakers were successful. When he wasn't, they drowned. He scored 36 of the team's 87 points in Game 7 in one of their 2 wins, and that still almost wasn't enough. Meanwhile, the Celtics were clicking. In Game 4, the Lakers got up by as much as 24 in the first half, while Kobe scored just 3. But even that wasn't enough to hold Boston. Went on a 12-0 run to end the third and took the lead at the start of the fourth. LA stretched it to 6, but they should have just let them win in 5. Because a 39-point blowout in Boston deemed the Celtics the rightful champions of the league once again. The real winner was the league. Anytime the Lakers played for the title, ratings shot up, and as much as Spurs fans might not want to hear this, no one was watching them win their titles. People tuned in for Kobe Bryant. Even in the 07 finals with LeBron, no one was watching. In fact, it was the lowest watched finals of the decade. Bringing the high-stakes rivalry of Celtics-Lakers basketball, and this one even to an unbiased observer, is hard to not think back at and smile. Another win for the league was the Redeem Team, the squad that the newly revamped Team USA led by Coach K, that compared to the 04 team was miles ahead. It featured Bron, Kobe, D-Wade, Melo, and others that had one goal: take the gold back. Kobe set the tone with his 5 a.m. workouts, and after a plus 161 point differential across 5 preparation games, there was no doubt that they'd dominate. And they did. They killed everyone. They played with a different intensity, especially Kobe, who famously ran right through teammate Pau Gasol in the opening possessions of their game against. Kobe brought the same intensity to the next season in the next campaign for the title. The regular season, though, was one of the peaks of the LeBron vs. Kobe debate. Kobe wasn't necessarily playing much worse than in 08, but LeBron had entered his element as a defensive and tactical monster. The Cavs won 66 games that season, and the Lakers 65. And as nice as it would have been to see Kobe get his lick back on Boston the very next year, a Kobe vs. LeBron finals was ultimately marketed as the dream scenario for the NBA. But the talent pool was getting deeper. This wasn't Bird and Magic's league, where the same 2 teams repeatedly made it. The league slowly built an army of talent that felt capable of winning a chip. Even compared to the earlier years of the decade, there was just so much more. D-Wade and Shaq were still there. The Celtics' Big Three was enormously talented. LeBron James and the Cavs were around. The 7 seconds or less Suns reinvented offense in front of our eyes, and yet the team that made the finals was the guy we love to clown on. Now the Magic were ahead of their time. As someone who never saw the mailman, Dwight Howard was the best pick-and-roll target I've ever seen. And with an army of shooters around him, the Magic used outward gravity to create a 2020s offense in 2009, around a single star and all-time defender. They may have robbed us of a Kobe vs. LeBron finals, but brilliant nonetheless. When the Magic had to go against maybe the most focused version of Kobe, they couldn't hold him. His goal ever since Shaq had left was to win a ring without him, and no one was stopping him that season, especially not Rafer Alston and Michael Pieris. It deprived us of seeing a Kobe vs. LeBron matchup, but it also put the "Can Kobe win a title by himself" convo to rest.
You're up 2-0. What's the story? Are you not happy, or you're only half happy, or?
Still to be happy about.
You're up 2-0.
Job's not finished. Job finished? I don't think so.
Okay.
It just showed Kobe's killer mentality again. He wasn't satisfied until he saw that his team had won 4 games, and it didn't matter that the Lakers were clearly going to roll through Orlando. As the league went into the 2010 season, it seemed like David Stern had the clean corporate league that he always had been hoping for. The Lakers and Celtics had restored the league's prestige, and LeBron was becoming the global icon we thought he would be. But just when the thug narrative seemed to be fading history, Agent Zero was ready to step in. After a card game went wrong, Gill and teammate Javaris Crittenton couldn't hold themselves back. You know, Arenas was doing his thing to purposely get under the guy's skin, and Crittenton was not letting it happen. At this point, Arenas' career wasn't over, but it wasn't far from that because of his knee issues. I don't know why Arenas even imagined that this would be a good idea, but after Crittenton and Gill were throwing around shit like "I'm gonna shoot you" or "burn you alive," surely all in good fun, Arenas took some time out of his day to bring some guns into the locker room to see if Crittenton was gonna chicken out. The fuck? It violated team, league, city, and state ordinances, and Gilbert Arenas in Gilbert Arenas fashion was about as unserious as he could possibly be. He already was going to get a felony charge, but he decided that it would be a good idea to dance around during pregame introductions while throwing around finger guns. If that doesn't tell you that someone hasn't learned a lesson, I don't know what will. And Stern hit him hard, suspending him for the rest of the season while he was legally charged with 2 years of probation and a month in a halfway house. The most ironic part about it is that this would be the last headline coming out of the NBA of the 2000s, as it happened on Christmas Eve. Luckily, that season wasn't just remembered for that, because Boston and LA would run into one another in the finals, and the series would become an instant classic. In Game 1, a 30-piece from Kobe would give LA the game, before a Ray Allen 30-bomb gave Boston Game 2. But let's get down to it. What we all remember the most from that series was Game 7. Kobe had an extremely poor night, going 6 for 24 and 0 for 6 from 3. While he couldn't buy a bucket, the other team couldn't either. Ray Allen was incredibly inconsistent across the series and couldn't get anything to fall. Paul Pierce was the same way. But what did put the Lakers ahead in the game were the other guys. Well, you still had Kobe grinding it out and picking up 15 boards despite the off night, but Pau Gasol proved his brilliance with a 19 and 18 night. And Artest came out of nowhere with a 20-piece, including a clutch 3 that even had himself surprised. It's ironic that he was the player to do it too. He almost put the NBA in the ground and then hit one of the most memorable final shots of the 21st century. The Lakers won 83-79, and despite Kobe's poor shooting performance, it was definitely the sweetest finals win of his career. He beat the Celtics, he beat them without Shaq, and he was officially a 5-time championship winner. But as the confetti settled, the new era was officially here. Kobe had completed his arc, LeBron was becoming unstoppable, and a fresh wave of stars had arrived. Every decade tells a story, and the 2000s left us with more questions than answers. The league was grappling with life after Michael Jordan, sprinkled with unlikely risers and playoff series that left us craving more, or wishing for a different result. It's easy to look back at the 2000s after the perfection of the 90s and see a decline. But that's the thing about the 2000s. It wasn't perfect, and it didn't have to be. It was loud, messy, chaotic, and sometimes outright ridiculous, but it was alive. From Kobe carrying broken lineups with 81-point nights, to LeBron announcing himself as the generational force, to Ron Artest, Stephon Marbury, and the rest rewriting what we thought was possible. The decade thrived on unpredictability. Stars rose, fell, clashed, and sometimes just plain lost their minds. And fans were along for every wild ride. The 2000s didn't leave us with neat answers or clean dynasties. It left us with moments, characters, and games that felt raw, urgent, and unforgettable. It was imperfect, but that imperfection, that was pure basketball. And it was the kind of chaos that the world didn't know it needed. And that itself might just be perfection.